The Galactic Diplomatic Summit was the kind of event that made the universe hold its collective breath. All 17 variations of respiratory systems represented by the attendees were momentarily synchronized in anticipation. Hosted on Nexus Station, a massive spinning wheel of technological marvels and questionable food service options, the summit brought together the most powerful, intelligent, and paranoid species the galaxy had to offer. Captain Vrex'thar of the Drelvidian Security Force stood at attention, his four eyes scanning the arriving delegates with practiced suspicion. His exoskeleton clicked nervously as he watched the human contingent disembark from their shuttle. Status report on the human threats, he chittered to his lieutenant, a lanky Drelvidian named KZT, who was frantically tapping on a holographic display. "Sir, preliminary scans indicate the human delegation includes 3 classes of threats," reported KZT. "Show me," demanded Vrex'thar. The holographic display flickered to show 3 highlighted humans. The first was Ambassador Gregory Powell, a towering figure with a booming voice and shoulders broad enough to support the diplomatic weight of Earth's interests, along with several small moons. The second was Commander Alexis Stone, the military attaché whose service record included successfully negotiating peace with the notoriously war-hungry Vraxians by arm wrestling their supreme general into submission. The third was Dr. Elijah Frost, a physicist whose theories on quantum manipulation had earned him both a Nobel Prize and several death threats from religious extremists who believed he was playing God with the building blocks of existence. "These humans require constant surveillance," declared Vrex'thar, "especially the military one. Did you see those biceps? She could crush a Drelvidian skull like a nutrient pod." "Yes, sir. We've assigned our best agents to monitor them. We've also prepared contingency plans should the humans attempt any of their infamous pranks or practical jokes, which our cultural experts believe may actually be disguised combat training exercises." Neither Vrex'thar nor KZT noticed the 4th human who exited the shuttle after the others. She wasn't particularly tall or short, strong or weak, loud or quiet. She wore the standard diplomatic assistant uniform without any distinguishing features, and her brown hair was pulled back in a functional but forgettable style. Her name badge read Meredith Fleming. Though everyone called her Mary, not that many people called her anything at all. Mary clutched her datapad and hurried after Ambassador Powell, who was already engaged in a heated discussion with a gelatinous Blorbian representative about tariff regulations on Earth's most valuable export, reality television. "And I'm telling you, Ambassador Glorp," Powell's voice echoed down the corridor, "that the Real Housewives of New York is cultural art and should be exempt from your so-called mental pollution tariffs." Mary sighed and made a note on her datapad. This was her 3rd Galactic Summit, and they always began the same way, with Ambassador Powell picking a fight over something trivial while the real diplomatic work piled up in her inbox. Across the main concourse, Ambassador Zixaa of the Aquilian Confederation was briefing his staff on human behavior protocols. "Remember," the 4-armed diplomat warned, gesturing dramatically with all limbs simultaneously, "humans are unpredictable apex predators. They smile to show aggression, they consume ethanol to enhance their combat reflexes, and they frequently engage in ritualistic dominance displays called small talk. If a human asks about the weather, they are testing you for weaknesses." A junior Aquilian diplomat raised a tentative appendage. "But Ambassador, I read in the cultural brief that humans are mostly harmless and their bizarre behaviors are just social conventions." Ambassador Zixaa made the Aquilian equivalent of a snort, which involved briefly inflating his head crest. "Cultural briefs are propaganda. Did you know humans are the only species that deliberately seeks out substances that cause them pain? They put chemical irritants called spices on their food for enjoyment. What kind of creature does that except one evolved for warfare?" Meanwhile, Mary had managed to collect the ambassador's scattered luggage, arrange for his special dietary requirements, Earth cuisine only, preferably with extra gluten and dairy, specifically to annoy the lactose-intolerant Confederation of Planets, and was now attempting to download the summit agenda to her datapad. The station's internal network was notoriously finicky, especially during events when thousands of different technologies were attempting to interface with it simultaneously. "Excuse me," she murmured as she bumped into a tall, insectoid security officer. The Drelvidian barely acknowledged her, his 4 eyes fixed firmly on Commander Stone, who was now demonstrating Earth's traditional greeting ritual of a handshake to a horrified Mebulan delegate, whose species considered physical contact a precursor to mating. Mary slipped past the security checkpoint while all attention was on the commander's faux pas. The datapad in her hand beeped softly as it finally connected to the network. "Oh no," she whispered, scrolling through the updated schedule. Someone had double-booked the ambassador for both the interspecies trade agreement and the galactic cultural exchange at the same time. And worse, they'd scheduled the Human Behavioral Analysis Panel, an annual event where alien sociologists discussed humans like they were some fascinating new lab specimen directly after the ambassador's scheduled nap time. It was going to be a long summit. At the Security Command Center, Captain Vrex'thar was reviewing threat assessments with the station's head of security, a Taurian named Director Mox. "I've tripled security around the human delegation's quarters," Vrex'thar reported proudly. "If Ambassador Powell so much as sneezes aggressively, we'll know about it." Director Mox, whose species resembled a humanoid bull with an unfortunate fashion sense, snorted thoughtfully. "You're focusing too much on the obvious humans, Captain. My experience tells me it's never the loud ones you need to worry about." "What do you mean?" "Humans are crafty. They send their most intimidating specimens as decoys while their real operators work in the shadows." Mox leaned in conspiratorially, his breath smelling faintly of processed grass. "Watch the quiet ones. The forgettable ones." Vrex'thar's antennae twitched dismissively. "With all due respect, Director, I studied human threat patterns extensively. Their dominance hierarchies are straightforward. The biggest and loudest are always in charge." As they spoke, Mary Fleming was quietly accessing the summit's scheduling system, fixing the ambassador's double booking with a few efficient taps. She then proceeded to download the complete station schematics, strictly for navigation purposes, of course, and continued on her way, completely unnoticed by the security forces who were busy watching Commander Stone bench press a curious Sorblaxian diplomat. The summit was about to begin, and no one suspected that the most dangerous human in the room was the one nobody noticed at all. The Grand Assembly Hall of Nexus Station resembled nothing so much as a cosmic circus, if that circus were designed by committee and populated entirely by diplomats with superiority complexes. Species from across the galaxy filled the tiered seating, their hushed conversations creating a symphony of clicks, whistles, and the occasional existential sigh. Captain Vrex'thar hadn't slept in 3 cycles. His exoskeleton was developing stress fractures as he personally supervised the human surveillance operation. Currently, he was crouched behind a decorative plant, watching Ambassador Powell through micro-binoculars. "Sir," whispered Lieutenant Keyes Deed, "don't you think this is a bit excessive?" "Excessive?" Vrex'thar's antennae vibrated with indignation. "Did you read the report on the Geneva Convention? Humans created rules for warfare." "Rules? What kind of species needs rules to tell them not to eat their enemies or lay eggs in prisoners? The dangerous kind. That's what." Across the hall, Mary Fleming was doing what she did best, blending into the background while getting things done. She navigated through the crowd with practiced ease, her unremarkable appearance serving as the perfect camouflage in the sea of exotic beings. "Excuse me," she murmured as she slipped past a group of Voltraxians, their electromagnetic auras tingling against her skin. None of them even turned to look at her. Mary checked her datapad, confirming the ambassador's scheduled changes had been processed. As she did, a notification flashed across her screen, a security alert about unusual activity in the station's environmental systems. That's weird," she muttered, tapping to expand the notification. Before she could read further, alarms blared throughout the hall. The sound was immediately followed by the smooth, synthetic voice of the station's AI. "Attention, delegates. A minor security anomaly has been detected. Please remain calm while our security personnel investigate." The effect was instantaneous and predictable. Mass panic. Captain Vrex'thar abandoned his surveillance post and rushed toward Commander Stone, who was calmly sipping a beverage while watching the chaos unfold. "You." Vrex'thar pointed a clawed appendage at the commander. "What is the meaning of this? Is this a human distraction tactic?" Commander Stone raised an eyebrow. "Captain, if I wanted to create a distraction, I would have challenged Ambassador Gloop to a drinking contest again. This," she gestured around the room, "is not my doing." Meanwhile, Mary had slipped through a service door labeled Authorized Personnel Only. Her datapad, synced to the station's systems, showed her exactly where the security anomaly had originated, the Environmental Control Center 3 levels below. As she navigated the maintenance corridors, she spotted something odd, a trail of iridescent slime leading away from the main junction. Having memorized the species guide, out of boredom during her first summit, she recognized it immediately as the Xenovian secretion, a byproduct of their anxiety response. "That's strange," she whispered to herself. "The Xenovians aren't even supposed to be in this section." Back in the Grand Assembly Hall, security forces were conducting random scans of delegates, focusing heavily on the human contingent. Ambassador Powell was engaged in a heated argument with Captain Vrex'thar. "This is diplomatic harassment. My people have done nothing but participate in good faith. Then perhaps you can explain why our sensors detected unauthorized access to the station's environmental systems from a device using Earth encryption protocols," Vrex'thar demanded. Brecky, unknown to either of them, the real culprits were already several steps ahead in their plan. And equally unknown was the fact that the most dangerous human on the station was already on their trail, not because she was a trained operative or secret agent, but because she was the only person who had bothered to read the station's emergency protocols manual out of sheer boredom during her last visit. As security forces continued their theatrical but ineffective search, Mary Fleming followed the slime trail deeper into the station's restricted areas, armed with nothing but her datapad, a multi-tool, and that most dangerous of human qualities, curiosity. The Environmental Control Center resembled the inside of a particularly complicated clock if that clock had been designed by someone with an unhealthy obsession with blinking lights and unnecessarily labeled buttons. Mary slipped inside, her footsteps echoing softly against the metal flooring. "Hello?" she called out, receiving only the ambient hum of machinery in response. The slime trail led to a console in the far corner. As Mary approached, she noticed something odd. The access panel had been removed, and several crystalline devices had been attached to the internal circuitry. They pulsed with an eerie blue light that definitely wasn't part of the standard station aesthetic. "That can't be good," she muttered, pulling out her datapad to document the discovery. Before she could take a photo, the station lurched violently. The lights flickered, and the environmental systems emitted a series of alarming beeps. The pleasant synthetic voice of the station AI returned, though now with a disturbing electronic distortion. "Attention all delegates. Station entering emergency lockdown. Containment protocols activated." In the Grand Assembly Hall, chaos erupted as massive security doors slammed down, sealing all exits. Delegates from 100 worlds found themselves trapped together, a potential diplomatic catastrophe that quickly devolved into an actual diplomatic catastrophe. "This is obviously a human plot," shouted Ambassador Zix, all four arms gesticulating wildly. "They've trapped us here to force concessions on the dilithium mining rights." "Bureaucratic," Ambassador Powell countered, his face reddening. "If we wanted to force concessions, we'd just threaten to send you more episodes of Keeping Up with the Kardashians." Captain Vrex'thar attempted to restore order, climbing onto a table and firing his ceremonial stun baton into the air. The energy pulse hit a chandelier, which crashed down spectacularly onto the gelatinous delegation, temporarily flattening them into shimmering puddles of diplomatic outrage. "Everyone remain calm," Vrex'thar shouted. "Our security teams will resolve this situation promptly." The Commander Stone sidled up beside him. "Your security teams are locked out there," she pointed out, "and we're locked in here." Vrex'thar's mandibles clicked nervously. "We have contingency plans." "Do these plans involve accusing the wrong species while the actual saboteurs complete whatever they're doing?" she asked with a raised eyebrow. Meanwhile, Mary was examining the strange devices more closely. Her 3 years as a diplomatic assistant had taught her two things: always carry snacks for the ambassador, and pay attention to details others missed. These devices weren't like any technology she recognized, but they seemed to be interfering with the station's control systems. "Okay, she whispered to herself, what would Ambassador Powell do?" She imagined the ambassador bellowing threats and demanding action, which wasn't helpful. What would Commander Stone do? Probably punch the devices until they stopped working, also not helpful. What would I do? She finally asked herself, and that was the right question. Mary pulled out her multi-tool and carefully began disconnecting the devices. As she removed the first one, her datapad chimed with an incoming message. It was from Lieutenant KZ Teet, apparently the only security officer who had bothered to log her contact details. "Human Fleming." The message read, "We're detecting unauthorized access to environmental systems. Have you seen anything suspicious?" Before she could respond, a shadow fell across her screen. Mary turned to find herself face to face with three Xenavians, their translucent bodies glowing with bioluminescent anger. "Human," the largest one gurgled through its vocalization sac, "you should not be here." "I get that a lot," Mary replied, slowly backing away. "But technically, neither should you." "The great realignment cannot be stopped," the Xenovian continued, oozing forward menacingly. "The dominant species have had their time. Now we, the overlooked, will take control." "That's actually kind of relatable," Mary admitted, "but sabotaging a diplomatic summit seems extreme." "Extreme times, extreme measures," the Xenovian bubbled. "Now step away from our synchronization devices." Mary glanced at the partly disconnected device in her hand, then at the advancing Xenovians, and made the most human decision possible. She ran, clutching the alien technology and leaving a very confused group of conspirators in her wake. Back in the assembly hall, the temperature was rising as the environmental controls continued to malfunction. Species adapted to vastly different conditions were becoming increasingly uncomfortable and irritable, a diplomatic powder keg ready to explode. And somewhere in the maintenance tunnels of Nexus Station, the most underestimated human was running for her life, carrying what might be the only hope for preventing an interstellar incident. Mary Fleming had never considered herself athletic. Her personnel file, which no one ever bothered to read, listed her hobbies as reading technical manuals and making alphabetized lists of alien diplomatic protocols. Yet here she was, sprinting through maintenance tunnels, clutching alien technology, with three angry Xenovians slithering after her at an alarming pace. "Computer," she gasped between breaths, "route to nearest security checkpoint." The station's AI, still glitching from the sabotage, responded unhelpfully. "Nearest security checkpoint is everywhere and nowhere. Have a pleasant day." "Great," Mary muttered, taking a sharp left turn into a narrow corridor. Her diplomatic assistant training hadn't covered escaping gelatinous alien conspirators, but it had emphasized adaptability in unpredictable situations, which she decided was close enough. The Xenovian device in her hand pulsed rhythmically, its blue glow intensifying. Whatever it was doing, it wasn't stopping just because she'd unplugged it. Mary needed help, but who would take her seriously? She was just the assistant who fetched coffee and fixed scheduling conflicts. An idea struck her as she passed a maintenance closet. Ducking inside, she found exactly what she needed: a standard station repair kit. 3 years of reading technical manuals out of sheer boredom was about to pay off. Meanwhile, in the assembly hall, temperatures had risen to uncomfortable levels. The ice welders were melting into puddles of distress, while the magma-born were complaining it was barely room temperature. Captain Vrex'thar had given up on maintaining order and was now simply trying to prevent interspecies violence. "Has anyone seen my assistant?" Ambassador Powell bellowed, mopping his brow with an embroidered handkerchief. "Melanie, or whatever her name is." "Meredith, sir," corrected Dr. Frost, the physicist, "and no, I haven't seen her since the lockdown began." Commander Stone had stripped down to her tank top, revealing intimidating muscles that made several alien species instinctively back away. "You know," she said thoughtfully, "in situations like this, it's often the person no one notices who ends up being important." Captain Vrex'thar scoffed. Important? A human assistant. What could she possibly do? What indeed? At that moment, Mary was crouched in the maintenance closet, using her multi-tool to disassemble both the Zenovian device and parts of the repair kit. Her hands moved with surprising dexterity as she connected wires and rerouted power circuits. If I'm reading this correctly, she murmured to herself, this is a harmonic resonator calibrated to the station's operational frequency. Her years of reading technical specifications for fun had given her an encyclopedic knowledge of how things worked, knowledge that was generally useless at diplomatic functions, but it's surprisingly valuable when trying to counter alien sabotage. The closet door suddenly rattled as something heavy slammed against it. Human, gurgled the Zenovian voice from outside. Surrender the device or face dissolution in our digestive enzymes. Just a minute, Mary called back, working faster. I'm having a bit of a wardrobe malfunction. What is wardrobe malfunction? The Zenovian asked, momentarily confused by the human expression. It's when Mary yanked a final wire free and connected it to her datapad. You're about to get your plans completely undressed. She pressed execute on the makeshift program she'd created. The Zenovian device emitted a high-pitched whine before suddenly inverting its energy signature, now broadcasting a counter-signal that would disrupt the saboteur's network. The door burst open, revealing 3 very angry Zenovians. Mary did the only thing a cornered human could do. She threw her half-empty coffee thermos at them. The liquid splashed across their gelatinous bodies, causing them to writhe and bubble alarmingly. What is this corrosive substance? The lead Zenovian shrieked. Triple espresso with hazelnut syrup, Mary answered, ducking past them. I like it strong. She sprinted toward the central junction, datapad in one hand, repurposed alien device in the other. If she could reach the main environmental controls, she might be able to broadcast the counter signal throughout the station and disrupt whatever the Zenovians were planning. Back in the assembly hall, the lights suddenly stabilized as partial systems control was restored. The temperature began gradually returning to normal levels. See? Captain Vrex'thar declared triumphantly. Our security systems are responding. The situation is under control. Commander Stone glanced at her own datapad, which was receiving station security updates. Actually, she said with a bemused expression, it appears someone is countering the sabotage from Environmental Control Section B7. And according to the access logs, it's... Let me guess, Ambassador Powell interjected dryly. My assistant? But for the first time since the crisis began, all eyes turned toward a human they had previously ignored. The most dangerous human in the room had always been the one no one noticed until now. The main environmental control hub was a massive chamber filled with humming machinery and holographic displays showing the station's vital systems. As Mary burst through the doors, she found herself face to face with what appeared to be the entire Zenovian delegation, all 12 of them surrounding a central console that pulsed with the same eerie blue light as the device in her hand. Oh, Mary said, skidding to a halt. There are more of you. That's not ideal. The lead Zenovian, distinguishable by elaborate ceremonial tendrils, oozed forward. With the human assistant. How unexpectedly inconvenient. I get that a lot too, Mary replied, trying to sound more confident than she felt. Look, I don't know what this great realignment is, but sabotaging a diplomatic summit isn't going to help your species. The Zenovian diplomat made a bubbling sound that might have been laughter. For centuries, our kind has been ignored, overlooked in galactic politics. We are literally transparent. Do you know what that's like, human? Mary thought about all the times she'd been mistaken for a potted plant at diplomatic functions. Actually, yes. Then you understand why we must act. Once our resonance field fully integrates with the station's systems, all electronic communications will be filtered through our translation matrices. Every diplomatic agreement, every treaty, will subtly favor our interests. Mary glanced at her modified device, then at her datapad. The counter signal was working, but not quickly enough. She needed to get closer to the main console. She took a tentative step forward. Stay back. warned the Xenovian leader. Our bodies contain defensive acids that can dissolve organic matter in seconds. Noted, Mary said, then smiled. But you know what humans contain? Creativity and terrible decision-making skills. With that, she lunged forward, sliding across the slime-covered floor like a baseball player stealing home. The Xenovians reacted too slowly, their gelatinous bodies not designed for rapid movement. Mary slammed her modified device onto the main console and activated the counter-signal at full power. The effect was immediate. The blue pulsing light turned red, then began to flicker erratically. The Xenovians writhed in what appeared to be pain, their transparent bodies clouding with distress. "What have you done?" gurgled the leader. Inverted the harmonic resonance and synchronized it with the station's security protocols, Mary explained, as if it were obvious. "Also, I might have accidentally set it to the frequency that makes your species really uncomfortable. Sorry about that, I only had the basic xenobiology manual to work with." The station's systems began to reboot, lights flickering back to normal operation. The lockdown sirens wound down, and the security doors throughout the station began to disengage. "You've ruined everything," the Xenovian leader bubbled despondently. "Not everything," Mary countered. "Just your illegal sabotage plan. But you know what? I actually understand your frustration. Being overlooked is awful." At that moment, the doors burst open again. Captain Vrex'thar led a squad of security officers into the chamber, weapons drawn. Behind them came Ambassador Powell, Commander Stone, and an assortment of curious diplomatic staff. "Freeze," Vrex'thar commanded, then paused in confusion. "Wait, what's happening here?" Mary stood up, brushing slime from her now ruined uniform. The Xenovian delegation was attempting to hijack the station's communication systems. I stopped them." Ambassador Powell stared at his assistant in disbelief. "You? Stopped them? How?" "Well, sir, remember 3 summits ago when you told me to go read a manual or something while you were negotiating with the Arcturians? I've read a lot of manuals since then." Commander Stone stepped forward, surveying the scene with professional appreciation. "I told you, Captain. It's always the quiet ones." Captain Vrex'thar's mandibles clicked in agitation. "This makes no sense. Our threat assessment protocols are based on obvious physical characteristics and aggressive behaviors." Mary finished for him. "But humans aren't dangerous because we're strong or loud. We're dangerous because we're adaptable, and we get really, really bored." As security officers moved to apprehend the Xenovian conspirators, Ambassador Powell placed a hand on Mary's shoulder. "Meredith, isn't it? I think we need to discuss a promotion." "It's Mary, sir. And I'd rather just have a vacation day if that's all right." The ambassador laughed. "After saving the summit, you can have a week." As the Xenovians were led away, their leader turned to Mary. "You were overlooked, just as we were. Why fight against us?" Mary shrugged. "Because being underestimated isn't a justification for sabotage, it's an advantage. One you just wasted." Captain Vrex'thar watched this exchange with growing confusion. Everything he thought he knew about human threat assessment was being rewritten before his 4 eyes. Perhaps the most dangerous human wasn't the one with the muscles or the loud voice or the impressive credentials. Perhaps it was the one with the datapad, the coffee thermos, and the inexplicable habit of reading technical manuals for fun. The emergency session of the Galactic Security Council was standing room only. Representatives from every major power had gathered to discuss what was now being called the Nexus incident. At the center of the chamber stood Captain Vrex'thar, mandibles clicking nervously as he delivered his official report. "And so, in conclusion," he chittered, "we must completely revise our human threat assessment protocols." "They are." He paused dramatically, "more dangerous than we thought, but not for the reasons we thought." Ambassador Zixay leaned forward, all 4 arms crossed in skepticism. "Are you seriously suggesting we allocate security resources to monitor human administrative assistants? What's next? Tracking their janitorial staff?" "With respect, Ambassador," replied Vrex'thar, "the evidence speaks for itself. This human female with no apparent combat training or significant physical attributes neutralized a complex sabotage attempt using only a multi-tool, a datapad, and a beverage container. Director Mox of Taurian Security nodded sagely. As I've always said, with humans, it's never the obvious ones you need to watch. In the back of the chamber, Mary Fleming sat quietly, trying very hard to become part of the furniture, a skill she had perfected over years of diplomatic service. The attention directed her way was making her deeply uncomfortable. Being overlooked had been her comfort zone. Being the center of attention was decidedly not. MS Fleming called out the Galactic Council President, a Vendarian with impressive cranial ridges. Would you care to address the Council? Every eye, optical sensor, and sensory appendage in the room swiveled toward her. Mary reluctantly stood, straightening her newly issued diplomatic uniform, no longer an assistant's attire, but that of a full human diplomatic corps representative. She began awkwardly, then cleared her throat. What happened at the summit wasn't extraordinary, at least, not from a human perspective. We're a species that gets bored easily and solves problems creatively. Sometimes that looks like reading technical manuals for fun. Sometimes it looks like repurposing alien technology on the fly. She paused, gathering her thoughts. The Xenovians weren't wrong about being overlooked. Many species are. But they were wrong about how to address it. Sometimes being underestimated is the greatest advantage you can have. Murmurs rippled through the chamber as translation devices struggled to convey the nuanced concept. Ambassador Powell stood next to her, beaming with newfound respect. What MS Fleming is too modest to say is that humans are at their most dangerous not when they're trying to be threatening, but when they're simply trying to solve problems. We don't need physical intimidation or advanced weaponry. Give a human a paperclip and a deadline, and watch what happens. Captain Vrex'thar stepped forward again. Based on this incident, I propose a new classification system for human threat assessment. No longer will we focus solely on physical attributes or aggressive behaviors. Instead, we must consider, he shuddered visibly, their hobbies. The chamber erupted in alarmed chittering. A human who studies quantum physics for fun, at level alpha. Vrex'thar continued. A human who solves mathematical puzzles to relax, potential security risk. A human who reads technical manuals because they're bored. He pointed dramatically at Mary. Extremely dangerous. As the council dissolved into panicked debate, Commander Stone sidled up next to Mary. Enjoying your newfound celebrity? She asked with a smirk. About as much as a root canal, Mary replied. I miss being invisible. Trust me, that ship has sailed. The Drelvidians have assigned 3 agents to monitor you at all times. See that decorative plant in the corner? 2 of them are hiding behind it. Mary sighed. Wonderful. 3 days later, as the Galactic Summit finally resumed, Mary found herself with a new office, new responsibilities, and unwanted attention from virtually every security service in the galaxy. Captain Vrex'thar had personally installed surveillance equipment in her quarters with her reluctant permission and insisted on vetting her reading material for potentially dangerous technical information. As she sat in the newly reconvened summit, now seated at the main table rather than standing behind it, Mary noticed something odd. A new human delegate had joined the Earth Force contingent. A plain-looking man in a standard uniform who nobody seemed to be paying any attention to. He was quietly taking notes on a datapad, occasionally glancing at the station schematics with peculiar interest. Mary caught his eye and gave him a knowing smile. He returned it with a barely perceptible nod. While every security officer in the room was now watching her, nobody was watching him. And that, as Mary now knew better than anyone, was precisely what made him the most dangerous human in the room.